Join us on this 10 miles kayak from Port Eynon to Rhossilli on the Gower Peninsula on the 29th of July 2024. Watch on to learn about the stunning scenery of this wild and unspoiled part of the Gower. Landmarks along this route such as Culver Hole, Overton Mere, Paviland Cave and Worm's Head. How we coped with the tidal races at Port Eynon Point and at Worm's Head, the seal colony that we encountered, and the Sandbanks Optimal kayak that we used on this trip. This 10 miles paddle was on a stretch of the Gower coast between Port Eynon and Rhossili. We launched at 12 noon from Port Eynon beach, and after passing Culver Hole and Overton Mere, we continued past towering cliffs and the famous Paviland Cave. We paddled past Mewslade Bay, and after a brief stop at Fall Bay, we set off around the iconic Worm's Head. After being entertained by a colony of seals on Worm's Head, we landed at Rhossilli Bay at 5:30 p.m. We launched from the beach at Port Eynon at 12 noon on schedule, which was unusual for us since we normally launch later than planned. Over there are the remains of the 16th century salt house at Port Eynon, which as the name suggests is where they used to make salt. I'm looking east towards Oxwich Point, which separates Port Eynon Bay from Oxwich Bay. As we paddled out around Port Eynon Point, the sea became quite rough as we crossed the tidal race, which can churn the sea up at certain times of the day. Fortunately, I was wearing my lucky captain's hat, which seems to protect us from any such dangers when we're out paddling. We managed to survive the tidal race and rounded Port Eynon Point, which is the most southerly point on the Gower Peninsula. We're just passing Culver Hole, which is a 60-foot wall built in front of a large cave back in the 13th century, apparently as a dovecot. According to local legend, Culver Hole was used by the brigand John Lucas as a storehouse for smuggling, with tales of a secret tunnel connecting it with the nearby salt house. Our inflatable kayak would be great for smuggling. It's surprising how much booze we can stash under the decks. We paddled towards Overton Mere, a rocky cove on the west side of Port Eynon Point. At low tide, there are some remains of the wreckage of the Rhossili, a Dutch tugboat that went down here in 1940. However, the ship's wheel now resides in the ship-inn at Port Eynon, which happens to be one of the kayak crew's favourite Gower pubs. We've been paddling about an hour and a half and our stomachs are rumbling, so we can have an on-the-water lunch break, including a cider of course. There's a great view looking up the coast towards Worm's Head in the distance. We passed a small boat coming the other way down the coast and followed maritime etiquette by acknowledging our fellow mariners. We didn't pass any other paddlers in between Port Eynon Point and Rhossili. I guess nobody else was crazy enough to paddle this stretch of coast that day. We're just passing the famous Paviland Cave, where they found some early human remains, which they called the Red Lady of Paviland, but in fact turned out to have been a man. This is a stunning and wild part of the Gower coastline, which is well blessed with caves and amazing rock formations. Looks like a welcoming committee of black cattle following us on the cliff tops up there. We approached Mewslade Bay and were now about 2/3 of the way along the 10 miles route. We had launched our kayaks from Mewslade a few times previously. There is parking up at Pitton, but it's about 2/3 of a mile walk with all of your gear from there down to the cove. On this trip we were using the tandem version of the Sandbanks Style Optimal full drop stitch inflatable kayak. The decks and hull inflate to 12 psi, so are very firm and help to give it performance similar to a hardshell kayak, but with the portability of an inflatable. We've done a full review of the Sandbanks Style Optimal on our product reviews playlist on our YouTube channel. The Sandbanks Optimal also comes in a smaller solo only version if you prefer going lone wolf. The tide was coming in for the first hour of this trip, but then was going out for the remaining 4 hours or so. This section of coast is at the end of the Gower, so it doesn't seem to be that affected by tides, other than at Port Eynon Point. And at the shallows between Rhossili and Worm's Head, we decided to paddle it from Port Eynon to Rhossili, mainly due to the fact that the wind was mostly blowing northwards on the day in question, and we did seem to be drifting northwards at times when we stopped paddling. The sea swell forecast predicted fairly light winds from the south swinging round from the west, and this was how it played out on the day. The primary swell forecast was only 0.3 metres from the southwest, but transitioned into a glass sea by late afternoon, and this aspect of the forecast also turned out to be accurate. This is an exposed and remote coastline, and we'd recommend only paddling it in favourable conditions. We approached Fall Bay, which is a remote sandy beach down the coast from Rhossili. I foolishly managed to crash my drone into a cliff as we landed on the beach, but luckily was able to climb up and retrieve it from the ledge it had crashed onto. From Fall Bay, the drone gave us a panoramic view up the coast towards Worm's Head. We had replaced the damaged propellers and thankfully it still seemed to be airworthy. We also got a great view down the coast towards Port Eynon Point. After my kamikaze drone antics at Fall Bay, we set out towards Worm's Head. As we paddled out across the channel between the mainland and Worm's Head, the outgoing tide raced over the shallows and churned the sea up, giving us quite a rough ride. At one point I thought I'd have to put my lucky captain's hat on again, but fortunately we managed to get across okay and the sea settled back down. We paddled out along the southern side of Worm's Head, a beguiling headland of carboniferous limestone. Worm's Head juts out into Carmarthen Bay and is one of the Gower's most prominent features, visible from as far away as Tenby. Worm's Head is the furthest westerly point of the Gower Peninsula and it's probably my favourite part of the Gower to paddle. We paddled out to the end of Worm's Head for one of the finest vistas on the entire Gower Peninsula. As you can see, we're rounding the end of Worm's Head, looking back towards Rhossili in the distance. The name Worm's Head is derived from an Old Norse word worm for sea serpent. The Vikings believed the island was a sleeping dragon because of its shape rising from the sea like a mythical beast. I'm sure that I must have some Viking ancestry since I love exploring and voyaging around the coast, although I think my pillaging days are long since gone. Worm's Head is comprised of 3 islands, the inner head, the middle head and the outer head. In total it is approximately 1 mile long. Worm's Head is only accessible on foot for 2.5 hours either side of low tide via a causeway which connects it to the mainland. The large sea cave on the right is called the Devil's Bridge, which is one of the most photographed features on the Gower. The sea is usually calmer on this north side of Worm's Head compared to the sea on the south side of the island, since it's more protected from the western swells. This 10 miles trip was part of our undertaking to paddle every section of the 870 miles of the Wales coast. We came across a huge seal basking in the sun. He was massive and if we'd collided with him in our kayak, then I suspected we'd have come off worse. The giant seal ignored us with disdain as we paddled by. He seemed more concerned with topping up his suntan. As we paddle along the northern side of Worm's Head towards Rhossili, we've come across a gang of seals on the rocks over there. I'm finally making good use of the 5x optical zoom on my iPhone to get some closer footage of the seals on the rocks over there. There's a resident colony of Atlantic grey seals on Worm's Head, so you often see them when you paddle here. That big bull seal on the right looks almost as big as the huge one we saw earlier. That must be his missus on the left. Oftentimes when you're paddling you get seals sneaking up to you in the water, like this one just coming up ahead of us now. The inner head island on Worm's Head seems to be plastered with seals. We must have seen over 20 of them already, and there's even more down there. It's probably too early to see any seal pups. I think they generally have them sort of late August or early September. Either that was the seals calling or Archie Cider hasn't agreed with him. We crossed over from Worm's Head to the mainland and paddled along the cliffs towards Rhossili for the final leg of the journey. The towering bluffs of Rhossili Down, the tallest point in the Gower, loomed over the bay. In terms of logistics, we'd left cars in the National Trust car parks at either end of the route at Port Eynon and Rhossili. You have to pay to park at both of these car parks. The car park at Port Eynon is only a short flat walk from the beach. However, the car park at Rhossili is up on the cliff above the beach and you have to trek almost half a mile up the steep path from the beach to the car park. Wheeling the deflated kayak in the carry bag and carrying all of our gear up this steep path was pretty strenuous, especially after a 10-mile paddle. If you only had one car, then you can get bus 118 from Rhossili to Port Eynon or vice versa. Strangely though, whilst bus 118 runs frequently from Rhossili to Port Eynon, it seems to run much less frequently going in the other direction. The Worm's Head Hotel at Rhossili is a great pub where Archie and I had food after this paddle. The beer garden at the Worm's Head Hotel must have one of the finest views of any beer garden in the UK, overlooking the stunning Rhossili Bay. The King Arthur at Reynoldstown is another fairly local option for some post-paddle beers and food. This 10 miles paddle had covered some of the most stunning scenery we'd yet to see anywhere on our trips around the Wales coast. If you enjoyed the video, then please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing by clicking on the left below. Click on the right below to be taken to the playlist of videos of our other trips around the Wales coast. Don't forget to check out our website, which is linked below. Happy paddling from the kayak crew.